are coming on now. We're waiting for Instagram, which gives me a 3 second minute to slip my coffee very loudly.
Don't sip it loudly. Like, you can do it without sipping it. It's like, let's put the most annoying sound in the world.
You want to hear the most annoying sound in the world? They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. Anyways. No, I'm sorry. It's Sunday. I just can't get that out of my mind. It's Sunday, and it's a lovely weekend for us to go ahead and talk about a lot of things. But first, I do want to introduce our new sponsor. You ready for this, guys?
Sponsor.
Yes, our new sponsor, Poodle
What's
Pops, the canine treat that Republicans eat and eat and eat and eat.
I don't get it.
You don't get it. All right. Would you prefer Doberman?
Oh, I see. Because they're eating the dogs. Okay.
Yes, Poodle Pops. You know.
Yeah.
Now, with or without THC, they're pretty good, but that's besides the point. All right. Tell you what. Let's just put all this aside. All animal eating stuff is going to be off to the side, and let's go into the rotation. That means put on. In my soul, you're a corner in my heart. Okay, are we frozen here?
No, not at all, Gary.
I don't think your internet's working, Gary. How many megabytes? Megapixels?
Oh my! I have 1,201 megabytes per second over here.
And
all right,
can you hear me?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah,
we're
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Okay. Anyways, my name is Gary Stein. I'm the political director here at Suncoast Normal, coming to you from beautiful Hernando County, where everybody from Pasco County comes when they get chased out by all the congestion and high prices, only to live in the middle of nowhere. But that's besides the point. I am your political director here at Suncoast Normal, and also their master of public health. Press the button.
I already asked you before. You can't hear that button, can you? It sounds weird.
I can hear it sometimes.
It sounds like static.
It does. And coming to us down to my in the lower left hand corner, off to the left there, is our deputy director, master of business administration, and the owner of the Chillum CBD and mushroom dispensary, now in its first anniversary.
St. Pete store 1 year.
That being Carlos Angel Jose Ermida, our semi-Cuban portion. And right above him, coming to us from Maryland, above the Beltway where he hits him below the Beltway, our executive director, Christopher Cano.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. Happy to be here.
All right, here we go. Now, we have, 7 weeks left until the election. I'm so excited because this could change everything or not, based on the ability of voters to know exactly who they're voting for. And for that reason, we have this thing called rotation, better know a candidate. Are we frozen again? No, we're not. Okay, good. We're having some issues here today, but we'll deal with it because I think this whole thing is rigged. I think it's all rigged. But we have two candidates here from semi-urban districts, which have been red in the past, and we're looking to see if that's going to change because, face it, guys, things have got to change. And so we have here, first off, coming to us from St. Johns County, which is that space in between Jacksonville and St. Augustine that everybody goes to sometimes. Right. and below that, in the studio with Carlos today, we have coming from beautiful District 54, which used to be in like Vero Beach until like a couple of years ago, but now all of a sudden it's in the middle of the state in Pasco County, which used to be 69 because redistricting is just the way we do things here in Florida. Karl, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correct. Karl Cieslak. Is that right?
Yep, spot on.
All right, very good. Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with your district and its many different shapes and forms because I used to live in Wesley Chapel until the prices got too high and the congestion got too much. But it's an interesting county. I mean, you're going up against this guy Randy Maggard, the appliance king of Zephyr Hills, who was also head of the I guess Swift Mud at one point in time. I was reading his bio the other day. And it says vice president of a corporation. Yeah, his family's business. But that's just the way we kind of like skew things here. He's not a bad guy. He just doesn't have much to say. He actually had a bill this last session about anti-Semitism, which was interesting because of the fact that there's like maybe 6 Jews, I think, in his county. I'm one of them. But it just goes to show you people get the bills that they're given sometimes. And if he wants to go for it, go for it. But I'm really interested, Carl, in knowing what's going to be happening in your. Are we here, Leather? Because I lost your video.
I can hear you guys. I can. We can. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, we hear you, Carlos. Are you able to keep moving our captions?
Yeah.
There we go. All right, cool. All right. Well,
There you go.
I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the camera. I tried to.
I'll tell you what, because I'd like to get some some feedback on Carl there so I can see him. So we're going to go to Keith first.
Yep.
I would appreciate
Keith,
that. Yeah.
how are things in St. Johns County? What are the big?
The big things in St. Johns County.
Okay, good. Yeah.
First of all, St. Johns County, you kind of got it a little wrong. It's between
What are the
between
big topics
Jacksonville and
there?
Daytona. So right in the middle is St. Johns County, which includes St. Augustine. So St. Augustine's kind of like all part of the district. But anyway, so what's going on in St. Johns County? It's we're getting the PGA headquarters. Woo. So it's kind of like the higher end suburb of Jacksonville, et cetera. A lot of golf and all that stuff. But DeSantis famously just tried to put a nice hotel and golf course in one of our sacred lands of Anastasia State Park, which got quite a reaction.
Now, isn't Anastasia Park where supposedly the Fountain of Youth actually is?
Right next to it. It's the
That
same
Ponce de
area.
Leon was looking for?
Yeah, it's the same area. It's not actually the same park, but they're both. It's a real nice state park and a tourist trap, is what you described.
Well, what's kind of interesting is that here we have the Fountain of Youth in this state that has a lot more seniors than you can ever imagine, and none of them seem to be getting any younger, but they seem to be living a lot longer. So maybe it got into the aquifer. I don't know. Whatever Nestle hasn't pulled out of the ground, perhaps it's getting to the people there.
Yeah,
But
a little bit of it, I suppose, but it's real sulfur water. It tastes terrible, so I wouldn't even try it if I were you. And it hasn't worked for me. As you can see, I had hair when I moved here, so.
well, you're a nurse. If anybody's having any adverse reactions to the waters up there and the springs and things of that sort, and this whole thing with the state parks is just unnerving, and it seems to be getting worse and worse by the day. Started out with 5 spots, then 17 spots, and then 26 spots, and they added the 17 spots back in. It looks like behind our back, DeSantis was trying to privatize all the state parks in the state and put in pickleball courts.
Exactly, and golf courses and hotels. Makes you wonder who's going to actually make money off of that. But what developer, what golf course manager? Who follow the money trail, and you'll find out what's really going on.
And that seems to be the way a lot of things go in regards to Florida. If you follow the money, you'll know exactly who really wanted that bill being filed. That
Right.
said, we've got about a dozen bills we've been trying to file for the last years, and we don't have money.
Yeah.
And maybe that's one of the reasons they haven't gotten as far as they have, or the fact that the times haven't been right. But we've been working very hard on making certain that the current medical program works better. And especially when it comes to people and medicine is concerned, we find it's outrageous that if you have a medical card for medical marijuana, because of the fact that they think that survivability is less, they could take you off the liver transplant list or any other transplant lists if you have a medical card. And we actually have a bill that would reverse that.
Wow.
Do you?
I actually didn't know that, but I mean, I'm totally for number 3. I mean, Amendment 3. I've seen so much in my time as a nurse. Replace Xanax, replace all the benzodiazepines, replace half of the pain medications with marijuana and new BFM. much better results and less addiction. It's ridiculous that it's not legal. The only thing is it's too easy to grow, and not enough people make money off it, I suppose.
Yeah, not only that, but we are genuinely concerned that, I mean, we need this bill because of the fact we've got tens of thousands, and Chris has the exact numbers of how many people have been arrested for simple possession.
So then there's that, yeah.
That literally ruins their lives and makes it is so hard to expunge.
Yeah,
Having that will fix that, at least that one aspect.
yeah. Any record for nonviolent crime like that is, to me, ridiculous. But that's, it's not even property crime. It's just what's wrong with, who you hurting by smoking a joint? I don't get it.
Well, apparently, some people seem
Alcohol
to
is
feel.
legal, and and I can go get any prescription for benzodiazepines or for opioids or anything else. But anyway, yeah.
Well, one of the things we're also concerned about is that if we do have adult use, and we don't use the word recreational per se, because like that they also use the same word for opium and heroin as recreational use. But the fact is, we want to make certain that the medical program is not cannibalized by the adult use program, because right now with the medical program, you will have a better access to the right type of cannabis to use for your particular disabling condition.
Correct, but also we need to expand some of the access points on the medical aspect as well. Why is it not approved for chronic pain, for example?
Well, it's approved for chronic pain, but only when it comes to the conditions that are currently listed, the 10 qualifying conditions.
Correct.
And that really does kind of narrow things down because, like, for instance, autism is not included. Sickle cell anemia is not included. That kind of situation. We actually have a bill, believe it or not, that increases the number of qualifying conditions to 35. That includes a lot of conditions that do specifically have chronic daily pain. And
Yeah.
if we can get those people away from opioids. Now,
Yeah. I mean, my fiance is actually a physician who writes for medical marijuana. So yeah, I see it all the time where people should qualify, but we can't qualify them for them simply because it's chronic pain, for example, back pain, and a lot of the chronic issues that people have. It's not approved. There has to be some other terminal diagnosis or cancer or something, as you described.
Now, Keith, I want to ask you. You're a registered nurse, right? You have a great career, vocation. Why jump into the foray of the shit show that is the Florida House?
That's an excellent question, actually, and sometimes I'm still trying to figure it out. No, I'm half retired from nursing. I still do nurse with hospice and whatnot, but I just had the time to do it, and so sitting back and just voting is not enough sometimes. It's so much ugliness going on in the state of Florida, and so it's just so ridiculous for the political atmosphere right now. So yes, I can continue to vote and complain and go on about my life happily, but if I can jump in and do something and I had the opportunity, I just have to do it. I can't say no.
Yeah.
what are the
You're somewhat of I guess you'd say, a public servant as it is. It's kind of the mindset that you have. So I'm just expanding on that.
Well, Keith, you are running against someone, and I looked at her platform, and she calls herself God, the God's true American conservative, and I'm a Catholic. Gary's the Jew on the show. Carlos is the resident agnostic / pastafarian.
I believe in mushrooms. I pray to mushrooms.
There you go.
But it always gets to me that folks who Bible thump the hardest
Right.
don't seem to really pick it up and read what it says, because your opponent took extra time and extra money and resources to really put on her website that her plan is to elect Donald Trump, to send the Florida State Guard to the southern border, to repeal something that I worked very hard at when I was in the student senate at the University of South Florida, was to get our student government to advocate for in-state tuition for our undocumented students. And she wants to repeal that, and then on top of it, she says exclude illegal immigrants from any government assistance program, like as if people who were here without social security numbers could even get government assistance. And it just seems like just the wrong person that I would want representing me in the state of Florida. I mean, you are a nurse. You're someone who has seen the shortcomings of our healthcare system. You're someone who gets the shortcomings of our current medical marijuana system. And even though resources may not be what they are, I'm glad that we have someone like yourself running for office. And that's why I think that I would encourage everyone, go to Keith Matthews' website right now and drop that man a donation, because we need people who are going to step up and represent we the people in office, not some short-sighted agenda that is based on some warped view of Christianity that the rest of us Christians don't subscribe to.
I really appreciate that, and I totally agree. And kind of being a nurse, you kind of come from the attitude of, non-judgmental, kind of all-inclusive. You have to have a non-judgmental attitude. And Sanctimonious Kim, is what I call her, is yeah, she's a bit ridiculous. With she's got book banning. She's done, advocated for that. She's obviously very much into the 6-week ban for women's reproductive rights. She's very much wants to tell other people how to live and how to think and what to do, and hold everybody to some twisted standard that she has.
Yeah.
Well, one advantage of District 18 is that it's actually a less expensive district to run in. People don't need necessarily $500,000 to run for office over there.
Well, she's got it though. Yeah.
But
she's got 100. I think last I saw was 145,000 in her bank account, which for this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But hey, I don't know where that money's coming from. Insurance people, it's coming from
corporations
and developers, and so she, I call her bought and paid for. But yeah.
Well, you have a Democrat in your area just north of you, who actually managed to get through her primary, who, among other things, is a Holocaust denier. Also, the fact that she's highly anti-Semitic, and she has said crazy things like, "Thank God for slavery," because otherwise we all would be worshiping trees right now if we were black.
Right.
And yet, this Democrat actually got through with a lot of money, and I don't think it came from Democratic donors.
No, she's a Republican plant.
I know we're starting to dive into the partisanness of the politics, but you can't sit there and allow this stuff to not get called out, and that's why we got to take the time to call it out. And folks throughout the entire elective cycle have been calling out different things. In particular, there's a lot about Amendment 3 that folks want to call out. Yes, True Leave has backed it with millions of dollars. Yes, there is going to be MMTCs that directly benefit from being able to sell first before other state licensed entities get to step in should Amendment 3 pass. And people have a lot of issues with Amendment 3's limited scope. But again, that's based on what the Republican Party of Florida has done to direct democracy over the last 30 years. We used to pass constitutional amendments with a simple majority. They chose to up it to 60%. Now they want to up it to 66.6%. And, they created this issue where it's got to be a single issue thing or their conservative court will strike it down.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of folks have drawbacks on Amendment 3 because it doesn't include home grow, but it couldn't include home grow because it would get struck down again by the courts. And so, Keith, we actually have a bill, and we asked every candidate about this, is to allow medical patients to grow it in a state-registered facility. We figured that's the only way we're going to get Republicans to support is that they can regulate the facility you can grow your plants in. And so, we hope that's something that you would support, one, as a healthcare provider, and two, we understand that medical patients need to really have their own medicine. In a lot of ways, medical patients sometimes need to grow boutique strains that may not be readily available. And as Gary said, we're worried about the medical system being left behind in an adult use state because we've seen it happen in other states. In Washington state, they cannibalized it altogether. And in other states, medical systems have not, continue to advance. I mean, like Gary said, we still got issues around people getting kicked off organ transplants, medical patients having their kids taken away or being investigated just for the sake of being medical patients, and people still being fired from their jobs. So there is a robust legislative agenda around the medical marijuana system, and even where we move forward with adult use, as we were talking earlier, with expungements and restorative justice reforms. So, these are things that we hope that you can support as a future representative.
Yeah, and also, I mean, one of the three obvious legal tracks that people should take, if they're not already, is if I have a medical condition which warrants me getting a card, that means that I have HIPAA protections as far as you even knowing that I have this condition, let alone have this card. So how any get a job or anybody else, or could even find out that I have a card, would really be very questionable to me and open yourself up to federal HIPAA guidelines.
Well, we do have to sometimes jump around that because we have a bill that will allow government employees to not lose their job or be prevented from getting a job just for having a medical card. Mm-hmm. And we utilize the Americans with Disabilities Act, which basically states that if a person has a disabling condition, you have to give them accommodations at their workplace.
Right.
And in this case, that would mean the ability to use cannabis off the job when they're not on call, obviously, so not blowing smoke in anybody's faces when they're at a work kind of situation. And that should work. And we've had it filed several times, but we haven't been able to get it into committee. We're hoping that if things change, that includes the 83-33 kind of balance we have currently, or whatever it is, over in Tallahassee, as far as the GOP versus the Democrats are concerned.
I think the only real answer is probably going to be, the best answer is going to be not only passing Amendment 3, but also reclassification on a federal level, if we can get that through. Because once that gets through, for example, I'm a nurse. So most of the facilities I work in are federally funded, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. So I cannot get a card. Because if I ever randomly was tested or anything else, no card's going to protect me. So I personally cannot take advantage of the benefits of medical marijuana or any form of marijuana. But I totally support that that we should have that right. And everybody should have that right, including, I think I should, but but again, I'm for the we, not just the me. And I think that really people do need to have this right and have this ability to not be stuck pandering to the drug companies for, relief of what could easily be done more naturally and more safely.
Well, Keith, we appreciate, your support and it's glad to have a healthcare professional like yourself stepping up to run for office. We have very few in the state house that really get it. And it's good to see one like yourself that's independent minded stepping up to run. So we wish you the best on your race, and we definitely want you to bring the heat and win this November. Carlos, we're going to go into the studio with you. You got a candidate in the studio, Karl. Gary, you're familiar with Karl's district. So, Karl, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, why did you decide to jump into this shit show that is Florida politics?
Well, it's a thing that last year I lost my mom. She passed away from endometrial cancer. So, last year I lost my mother to a 6-year battle with endometrial cancer. And honestly, I got tired of watching the continuation of the divisive politics that are going on. My background's hospitality. Here in Tampa, I was actually the senior HR manager down the street at the Epicurean Hotel for the last 2.5 years, and then also over at the Fenway Hotel up in Dunedin, two amazing properties under the Marriott Autograph Collection. And I just feel that I was called to do so. I finally worked through the process of loss of my mom. I still, thoughts pop in, and it sets off the waterworks because it's only been a year. I lost her this past June. And when Nikki Fried put out a call to make sure that every seat was filled, I felt called to be a part of that charge. And as I started to learn more about my opponent, Randy, I became even more enraged at how much he represents Donald Trump's politics, the extreme of Republican politics. I'm a moderate centrist Democrat, to be honest. My dad's retired military. He's an Air Force veteran. I was in an Air Force brat till I was 17. So I grew up seeing different viewpoints all over the country and the world as we traveled growing up. And I love Florida. I have lived in Florida now for 11 years. This is the longest place I've ever lived in my entire life. I'm 45. And there's so many wonderful, beautiful things about our state, but the continuation of the policies are so harmful and divisive. Yesterday's Tampa Bay Times had a feature where they are now banning books in public libraries. It blew my mind, from the tomfoolery and this, the screwing with our state parks or public lands. It just needs to stop. So many of us are in the middle of the spectrum and we're being represented by far extremes. And so that's why I got in. With Randy, he was one of the primary co-sponsors for the 6-week restrictive abortion bill this year. He was thank goodness, it never got out of, onto the vote, but he was a primary co-sponsor for the gender affirming care denial. Everything that is wrong that you could do to support humans, he's right behind it. Like Keith was mentioning earlier about corporate buyout. So what I would say is that if you go through Randy's donation list, there's probably about 5 or 6, and guess what? They're from his family members. The Oakleys were very heavily involved in Pasco politics. I see you rolling your eyes. You know who they are. But additionally, he just doesn't care. He doesn't listen to the people that live there. I've been out. I was at an event yesterday in Zephyr Park talking with people, and they said, "Will you actually take our phone call?" And I said, "Here's my cell phone number." I said, "This is my personal cell phone." Yes, my background is in hospitality. Hospitality is the primary driving economic function of the state of Florida. And we're doing things that are continuing to harm it. Visit Florida recently removed any reference to LGBTQ plus tourism. That provides almost $160 billion with a B dollars in annual revenue to this state. It's got to stop. The divisiveness needs to stop. So that's kind of why I jumped into this. I'm trying to honor the advocacy that my parents taught me to be, community driven and people focused. And right now our politics doesn't represent the people. It represents corporate interests. I'm a small business owner outside of hospitality. So my husband and I, we own a photography business, and it's like when it just pains me using anything that's state related IT technology. It's from 20 years ago. Like I literally have to spend 3 hours every quarter to enter in one by one transactions for sales. And it's the same for, Keith and I, when we do our election reports, which are now bi-weekly, by the way, which used to be quarterly because they're trying to make it harder for, smaller campaigns to get into it. It just stop with the barriers. My campaign manager was recently telling me, he's originally from working out in Oregon. He's like, they have to beg people not to run for office there because they make it so easy. Keith and I had to put up $1,800 just to get on the ballot. And, for Keith, that and me, that's a lot of money. We were very, very fortunate to get a little bit of support. I've been very fortunate most recently because I've been getting a lot of traction because my district is actually flippable. With Wesley Chapel having become so much more blue, Jessica Wright, who actually was able to unseat a Moms for Liberty school board member of 14 years, she won that race because of the blueness in my district in Wesley Chapel, and shockingly Zephyr Hills. When you look on the blue density, I was very, very surprised. So she won by 2 points, and it just is the energy and enthusiasm are there and through the tops. We had our debate watch party at my campaign office, which is at the Shops of Wiregrass. I had 30 people there. I had only really 20 people signed up, but people were walking by and see what we were doing when they're at the mall and say, "Hey, can we come be a part of this?" So it's really, really enthusiastic and engaging. And I'm just very grateful to have this forum to be able to share because, believe it or not, my husband has a medical card. So this is a personal issue too. And it is so important that people have access, legal access, fair access. My background's in not only hospitality, but in HR. So with it being in HR, they were talking about the medical card. I don't want to have someone discriminated against being able to get a job because of an outdated policy. So,
yeah, now Chris is actually SEIU over there in Maryland, but I know that the service workers and restaurant workers in Nevada and things of that sort have made major differences in regards to trying to unionize the business here, and get the hospitality into the industry as far as cannabis is concerned. Because lately, what I see is they hire folks, and they're all lovely folks, mind you, but the fact is they are not qualified as far as medical knowledge is concerned. You look at somebody behind that counter and tell them you have severe migraines, what cultivar is best for it, and you'll see a deer in the headlights right in front of you, which is really, really unfortunate. Oh, we got a baby shot here. Hold on a second. Can we move over there and just see the baby for just a moment? I haven't had a chance to see him live yet.
This is my son, Jean Carlos. He's 3 months old, and he is one of the reasons why I do what I do and why we continue to do this show, and continue to advocate, because the truth is that he is the future of our country. And this is to have you gentlemen on here today. Karl, I know that you're running because, as you said, you want to make sure that your family's taken care of and other families are taken care of. So I appreciate you stepping up, because I have no idea who he's going to grow into at this day. I have no idea who he's going to love. And with your background in human resources, I will want to ask you, if we could zoom back in on Karl. If the state of Florida was a corporation, the way its policies are going, as an HR person, what kind of grade would you give the state of Florida for if the people were its employees?
So that's a very good question. It's actually one of my platform policies is economic equality and freedom. We are probably an F- when it comes to employee relations. We don't even have a Department of Labor. Rick Scott did away with it when he was governor. So surprise. Rick Scott also gutted our unemployment. We have the worst in the nation unemployment system. He was very proud in 2019, after he was elected to Senate, to go on Fox News and say, with a population of 23 million people, we have 66,000 on unemployment. It was built to fail. And it's so frustrating because when I was a front office manager in 2020, when COVID happened, before I became a general manager, and I had employees who waited almost a week in a virtual queue to just get in to file their weekly claim, or if they could even log into the system at all. And it took a very good centrist-minded Republican, Jeff Brandes, who's the now retired senator from St. Pete. He stepped up and said, I got you. And he made it happen for my staff. And friends of mine who live in Orlando weren't even in his district. So there are good people on both sides as far as the conversations that need to be had. But the further we go down the rabbit hole, the more and more it looks like that the far extremes are coming to the forefront. With policy, though, it's definitely enough. The unemployment is one piece, but God forbid you get hurt in the state of Florida. Workers' comp, it's trash. You have a very small window of time to take care of it. You have an even smaller pool of doctors who will be willing to open up and take that practice. And when you are there, you're a number in a very long line. So it's one of those things that, as a HR person, I said, please don't get hurt, because if you do, you're going to be at the mercy of the states. And in this state, it's not good.
I'm glad you brought up workers' comp, because that's an issue that medical marijuana patients face across this country. And only a handful of states have even had to have this issue litigated by their Supreme Courts of whether or not your workers' comp doctor can choose to put you on cannabis therapy rather than, giving you opioids. And so I think that's another issue that we haven't even legislatively addressed. But, if you gentlemen are so open to it, I think that's a bill that should happen. Workers' comp in Florida should be able to cover, people's medical marijuana therapy if their doctor recommends that's the best pain management tool for them.
I completely agree. I mean, it's the more tools that you have in the toolbox that are legal, safe, and healthy, and they're regulated, the better. Opioids, as you saw, they hundreds of billions of dollars in an industry, but it's also so harmful because it's so highly addictive. And there's no innate addictive properties into, THC. And it's just, I will say that since my husband's had a medical card about 2 years now, his anxiety and the different things that he's tooled with when going through the shop and his doctor has made it so much easier because he has a very high stress job. He's actually a senior product manager for the homeowners insurance industry. So that's why one of those things in Florida, they're very sensitive. He is not responsible for the pricing. So just a piece for us in Florida, but
don't worry, Jimmy Petronas has it. He's on top of it.
He's on top of it like Donald Trump's on top of fixing our health care for 9 years. But
He's got a concept. He's got a
yes,
concept.
concept of a plan. I actually have a plan. So that's the difference between me and Jimmy Patronis and most of our Republicans in the legislature, too, when it comes to our insurance costs. It's one of those things like for insurance, we're the most expensive in the nation for home at an average premium of $12,000 a year. We're the second most expensive in the nation for our auto insurance because 27% of our drivers can't even afford to drive with the insurance at $4,000 a year. It's nuts. If you're thinking about it, the average person making like $15, $16 an hour, 3/4 of their salary is just going to cover the insurance on their home and their car. And forget everything else.
Rick Scott, when I had a chance to sit down and talk with him once, I had to wash my hands several times after that. Was all about jobs, 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 jobs. And I asked him if all the jobs that you're creating are low paying service industry jobs. With no all due respect to the service industry, I think you guys are underpaid.
Yes.
The fact is, does that really help the state as a whole?
No.
And I don't see that happening. And I also see we still have in our policy in the books, and it comes from a federal law, but it can be a fixed state-wise, that if you are disabled or if you're in the agriculture industry, they can actually pay you less than minimum wage because of these things called Chapter 14 certificates, which I tried to get moved this last session, and it didn't get moved. Hopefully that'll change this next year when our speaker actually has somebody who's got skin in the game in regards to people with disabilities. But I see that as an issue, not only for the people with disabilities, but also people who are disabled who are trying to get themselves better and be normal.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of parents, if you have a parent with PTSD and they are using cannabis, they are a better parent. And yet, still in the state of Florida, you can have your kids taken away for having a medical card. We have a bill for that. That basically says you can't go based strictly on cannabis use alone. There has to be something else involved before the DCF comes over and petitions to have your kids taken away.
And that's completely the thing. It's like whenever you look at anything, it was one of the things I was lighthearted about yesterday, but I was serious about. We're one of the few states that don't even have a recall function for our government. So if we are a right to work state, Keith and I can be fired from our job for any reason. No, we just don't like the way your hat looks one day. Why do we have to wait 4 years or up to 4 years to remove someone in the legislature that's not doing their job? So that's one of the things, because you need to have accountability, and just like in the medical industry and any industry, why don't we have accountability in the government? They're running roughshod over our personal freedoms, and that needs to come to a close. So one of the things I would propose is that if I am elected is to put that into office, because if I'm, as an HR person, held accountable by my standards and a member of the Society for Human Resource Management, yeah, of course, I'm going to lose my job if I didn't do what I'm supposed to, protecting someone's privacy or their private information or HIPAA things. But if, for example, Speaker Renner, it's like, black people are bad. It's like, no, they're not, or whatever bad thing that they, boogeyman that they kind of try and do. And that's the thing that's going on lately with politics is, the right uses scare tactics and boogeymen to get things done. But is that really helpful for the people? Is it helpful to, make it so only a select few are taken care of? For example, with medical marijuana, my concern is, actually, this is a concern. If and when we pass, Amendment 3, our wonderful government has a bad habit of taking people-led initiatives and strangling them with enabling language. So it happened in 2018 with the felons' right to restore for voting. They took it and they made it so convoluted that people still don't know whether or not they can safely vote. And then now there's the voting police knocking on their doors. You have the same concerns with Amendment 3 and 4. If we pass the right to enshrine, adult use of marijuana or reproductive freedoms, and then the state Republican majority legislator gets a hold of it, and if they continue to maintain the supermajority, they're going to water it down and make it so hard or so ineffective for consumer and public use. So those are things that you're taken into serious thought too.
That is why over here at Suncoast Normal, we know that if and when it passes, and we do hope it does pass, we're going to have a lot of legislative work ahead of us, because we've got to fix a lot of things. Number one, there's no policy in there in regards to public use, whereas they can no longer arrest you for having more than 21 grams or 20 grams or above of flour. They can arrest you for having a single joint on you if you happen to be smoking it in public or any place outside of a home if you own the home, which is basically where they are right now. We don't have any public use currently available. And that's one thing we got to be concerned about. And they're constantly telling us it's all about protecting the kids and things of that sort. So, Keith, I'm going to go back up to you for a second. You're a transferred New Jersey Quaker, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The last Quaker I dealt with was Nixon. That wasn't a good thing.
No,
Anyways,
no.
but were you working at emergency room or children's hospital before you started working hospice and things of that sort?
I did emergency room forever. Yeah, most of my career has been emergency room.
How many kids came into your emergency room overdosing on cannabis?
Never saw one.
Isn't that amazing?
How many fatalities have you seen in the ER from a cannabis overdose?
I never saw one.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, but I can tell you many overdoses and fatalities related to opioids or, severe status epilepticus, which is just severe seizures with brain damage from stopping your Xanax because you couldn't get it filled anymore, or from stopping your sleeping pills or your Valium.
Wait a minute, Keith. I'm very confused here because I've been spending a lot of time in Tallahassee these past couple of years, talking to these politicians, and they seem to be adamant that kids are getting into hemp products and calling poison control. What's going on with that? Why are they saying that?
It's because it's politically expedient to do so. Because the
so
paying to do it, whatever. I don't know.
I know you don't work for poison control, but you are a nurse, and the camera just did the thing when I put my hands up. But I know you don't work for poison control, but you are a nurse. Can you maybe tell me, like, if say the ER got a phone call, oh my God, my son just got into my hemp. He just ate 100 milligrams of THC. What would you guys say?
You can come in if you want, but just so we can monitor, but sleep it off. It'll be fine. The only time I ever actually saw anybody come in that was related to THC or anything else was when they accidentally ate laced brownies that they did not know were laced, and they got into their kids' stash basically, and they didn't know what was going on. But when you figured it out, it's like, oh, okay, we're fine. But never have I seen any long-term effects or negative effects or anything of accidental or a large amount of THC or any kind of hemp product.
Now, Corey Simon, the senator, I think he's in your district. I'm not certain. Mentioned the fact that he just wanted to get a little bit extra rest, and he tried some Delta 8 that he'd gotten from one of the local hemp shops, and suddenly found himself unable to think straight, unable to sleep, unable to eat, and rushed himself to the emergency room. Have you seen anybody who came in there saying, I tried this Delta 8 and all of a sudden my entire life is falling apart. Can you help me?
No.
It's funny because I notice a bit of a pattern here, so to speak, because every time they say something about the negative effects of cannabis and how we should be, and they reference some sort of an example, it seems to be I made a phone call or I visited, and they don't tell you what they said during the phone call or what happened when they visited the ER. Like Corey Simon did not say that the doctor just told him to sleep it off.
Right.
Or, I'd imagine probably the proper diagnosis would be an Arizona iced tea and a bag of Funyuns.
Exactly.
Now, I'm totally familiar with
a bag of crystals or whatever,
I'm familiar with the camp protocol in regards to hospice and things of that sort for terminal patients. But up until this point, officially, cannabis has never been part of that. It's just a matter of putting somebody in the hospice with enough morphine to make them slightly conscious, possibly. Do you see that as a possible way we could change things in the near future so that people can have the respect at their last moments of being able to be somewhat sentient?
Yes. I definitely agree. Now, I don't know that it could replace morphine in the most extreme circumstances of hospice care, but And obviously, the goal is not semi-consciousness with morphine or anything else. It is it is a result, though, in order to make sometimes some people comfortable. But definitely, THC is a great enhancement, even in the most critical and dire situations of pain and terminal restlessness, terminal pain. THC is excellent, excellent adjunct for that.
Well, with cannabis being Schedule One, December 2nd is actually when the DEA rescheduling hearing is happening.
Right.
National Normal is, of course, putting forward experts and putting together expert testimony to say, it shouldn't be in Schedule One. And most recently, the New York Times got a hold of some of those declassified Nixon tapes. And Richard Nixon himself says marijuana was not particularly dangerous. And so I encourage everyone to actually check out and Google the recent New York Times article that actually came out yesterday with the Nixon tapes. And listen to them.
I heard some of those tapes. Like he was saying, like he was like I think it was Texas. Like he specifically pointed out Texas. Where he's like, I don't really agree with that. Like all this jail time for marijuana in Texas, you can't do that. You can't put somebody in jail and ruin their life.
And here's the crux of it. Nixon truly was the last Republican that essentially had this conflict of putting the values of the American people ahead of or his own political re-elections and expediency, and it was his decision to push marijuana into the Schedule One classification that really was a direct result, according to his domestic policy advisor, Ehrlichman, that it was about attacking the anti-war left and over criminalizing, black neighborhoods. Even though use rates across socio-ethnic backgrounds tend to be the same, you see this disparities in arrests carried out with this policy, and the damage that Schedule One status has done in harming communities of color, in over policing, and helping militarize the police, in just bad policy. Keith pointed out he can't use cannabis in his current role, in current jobs. There are healthcare workers like nurses that work 12-hour shifts 3 to 4 days a week, sometimes pick up overtime 5 days a week. Their bones hurt. Their body aches. They have anxiety around that pain. They deserve to live a healthy life. And the truth is that the liver damage from taking ibuprofen all day is real. It's impactful.
Right.
But you
and
don't
Tylenol too.
get side effects with cannabis.
Correct. Yeah, it's so multifactorial. I mean, between the hemp industry with invading cotton, even though it's so much better for the land and for the environment to grow hemp, and so much better in every respect, but the cotton industry was more powerful, or the drug industry more powerful than the for something that you could grow in your backyard. So make it illegal so that you have to take my pill, and even though my pill is actually more dangerous. There's so many factors into all of this that are working against marijuana, but and as well as, of course, like you say, hypercriminalization. Everybody knows most pot and drugs are in the college campuses, but you don't see them raiding that because there'd be too much of a public outcry, too much rich people complaining that, you're going into Harvard University dorm room and you'll get more pot there than you will at any street corner in Boston. But at the same time, they're still going to go to the street corner in Boston because it's more politically expedient. I mean, it goes on and on, how ridiculous it is to criminalize marijuana.
Now, it is not illegal to have a bottle of any opioid in your pocket as long as it has its name on it. And
Right.
yet, if you are taking and if you can even take Oxycontin, and you're not going to be arrested for doing that. But if you have less than 21 grams, that's legal. But you take a single joint, you could get arrested. Like I said, as far as cannabis is concerned. And yet, one of the good things and bad things about Narcan is that it'll fix your overdose, but you won't get arrested for using it. You'll go right back on the streets and you can overdose tomorrow.
Correct.
How many patients did you see that were recovering from an opioid overdose who had just gotten Narcan, and as soon as they leave, they go right back out onto the street and do the same thing and possibly come back the following day?
More than I could count.
and
Seriously,
yet
more than I can count.
they made it illegal in the state of Florida at the legislative area to make it so you cannot use cannabis in a rehab facility. So if you are trying to recover from opioid addiction, one thing is just not open to you at this point in time in a rehab situation. So perhaps we have to have another situation where people can go to be able to use cannabis to get off the opioids. You see that as a possibility?
Oh, it would help. It would definitely work. Cannabis is such a much better choice. It's such a much better option. It doesn't have the withdrawal syndrome. It doesn't have any of the problems you see with opioids and with, the even Zoloft and the Paxils and the antidepressants. A lot of that stuff would more or less go away, or at least be much more manageable just under cannabis and much more safely. But nobody's making money on it.
Yeah. If somebody in the chat here knows better than I do, then feel free to correct me. But I helped a buddy of mine go through rehab at one point, and it really seems that there's like two approaches that these doctors take, and it really has to do with like they decide the approach within the first couple of days of rehab. It has really to do with the mindset of the person going through rehab. If the person that's going through it is really serious and really showing signs that they're really trying to do the work to get off of the drugs, then they go one way. And in the other direction, if they're like still struggling, still not really sure they can do it, not really confident, it doesn't really seem like it seems like they just try to prescribe lesser drugs to them in order to control the addiction rather than get rid of it. Right? Does that seem correct? Or
It's not my area of expertise, to be honest with you. It does sound correct, but I'm not had direct experience with that.
Carlos, let me chime in on that as someone who's actually been to rehab.
Just visiting though, right?
You went to rehab for weed, right?
Yeah. Court ordered rehab, right? For a marijuana addiction, and in exchange they expunged my record, right? Like it never happened. And that's the sad part. We live in a country where 8 out of 10 rehab orders for marijuana are by the courts. It's not people saying, "Oh my God, I have a marijuana addiction. Please help me get my life together." And the sad part about it is that oftentimes people's freedoms are outsourced to these rehab companies. They tell you to come in the morning and give them a urinalysis, and then if your pee is too diluted because you drink too much water, you can be violated on your probation. If you don't show up to a group therapy session, you can be violated from your probation. There is a lot to be said about how we also treat rehab in our criminal justice system, because it's supposed to be something that is a medical, issue. It's something that we should be addressing as a health issue, and it's still, when it's court ordered, is approached from a very punitive point of view. And as you said before, Gary, it's not like cannabis is something that can be utilized in a rehab program, and even definitely not court ordered rehab. There's a lot of people who are having to, if you got a good enough attorney, you get to keep your medical marijuana card should you get sentenced. And there's others where judges are saying, no, you can't use your medical marijuana card if you're going to, go into this rehab program to get your record expunged. So we do have a lot of work in Florida on the legislative side of things to fix a lot of how our criminal justice system approaches cannabis and approaches rehab for folks. But I can tell you that being in rehab for 10 months, in my, alleged marijuana addiction, that there was, no real approach to necessarily, get me to, how can I say, function without it. It was just go cold turkey. Don't screw up. Go to our rehab programs, and at the end of it, once you paid all the money that we're requesting of you, we'll clear your record out. That was my experience, in the year 2014, 2015.
I remember reading about a judge here. It was either in Tampa or the article was in Tampa Bay Times. But I remember reading about a judge saying that somebody that was going through rehab and had a medical marijuana card, and they're like, I have anxiety, I need my marijuana, and he's like, well, you take Xanax if you have.
That was in Pinellas County.
That
Yeah,
was in Pinellas County.
yeah, it was across the water.
How ridiculous is it when we have judges that are and politicians and judges making decisions about our health instead of health professionals? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why we need more health professionals like Keith to get up there in the legislature and actually ring true. And we need folks like Karl who have an HR background to realize that the state of Florida is failing horribly when it comes to.
It can go both ways though, because I've heard doctors that are now legislators claim that marijuana is bad for you. What's that guy that tried to cap THC?
Yeah, we've had some really shitty medical professionals, but again, the Florida Medical Association also were the ones that were pushing originally for doctors to have to take an 8-hour test to recommend cannabis rather than allowing doctors to take a simple refresher course or and making it harder. People, and then that's a criticism that they use too is, oh, well, it's like the pill mills. There's only a few doctors prescribing it. But when you make it hard for doctors to recommend cannabis, there's only going to be so many that are going to pay the money, take the test, and do it. You're going to have a limited amount of docs in the state of Florida that are going to be certified to recommend because you make all these barriers to do it. And it's like that meme from the Eric show where he shoots the guy and he goes, "Why would someone else do this?" That's literally how the Florida GOP in the legislature acts. Like, oh my God, why would politicians do this?
And in doing so, because they restrict the amount of people that can do it, it drives up the cost.
Yeah. And I want to go back to something Karl said. I find it interesting is that the folks on the right make boogeymens of groups of people when the folks to the left are making the boogeymens of the politicians on the right. So it's not an equal comparison, in a lot of ways. It's not like you got folks on the left picking other groups of folks to boogeyman to. No, it's like that's the boogeyman. The boogeyman is Donald Trump. The boogeyman is Ron DeSantis. It's Rick Scott. It's Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
It's Kim who's running against Keith. It's Randy who's running against Karl. Those are the boogeymen that you want to look at. It's not immigrants. It's not LGBTQ folks. It's not pot smokers.
No.
And face it, guys, it's tough to go ahead and fight for issues that are important to the average person when one of the first things you have to do is quell the amount of misinformation that goes around. Now, Karl, if you look across the street right there, you'll see on the top of the building it says the word Licata. Now, Victor Licata in 1924 killed his family with an axe because of the fact he had dementia precox, or what we now call bipolar disorder, and he was actually being treated with cannabis, but there was a push to get the cannabis off the streets at one point in time because of some fake political bullshit. So he ran out, he went crazy, and of course, the United States had a cannabis law against it for 6 years until it was made unconstitutional in the 1960s, saying that it was just no good for everybody, and yet we move on because of the fact that we knew damn well it wasn't the cause of the situation, and yet that kind of misinformation, which was also included in Reefer Madness, if you ever have a chance to watch it very quickly, he says, "I have this file here about a boy in Florida who killed his family with an axe across the street." But we're also dealing with other kind of misinformation in this election. We have DeSantis saying that Amendment 3 will allow kids to bring 20 joints to school.
And using state resources to back that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the other thing I love that says kids are going to elementary school and coming home with a sex change that they didn't want. Now, where the heck is that happening?
The same place where the dogs and cats are being eaten by the Haitians.
I mean, Voltaire said anybody who make you believe something outrageous will be you can teach them how to do something that's horrendous or something along those lines. And that's my concern when they put out these kind of things and these people actually believe them because they're hearing them. I believe that if you can't believe your ears, most likely it's not true.
Well, they believe it right away.
Yeah. Well,
They
Gary,
don't need anything to back it up. There's even like the moderator right behind him saying, no, that's not true. It came out that that's not true. And yet still these people are like, it came out of this fucking orange asshole's fucking mouth.
Okay, I'll go one
It
more
must
into
be
this thing.
true.
I know plenty of Haitians, and they live on Hispaniola. They were, except for like two giant, massive earthquakes and weather that practically destroyed their entire living situation. And of course, politics there, where they had the baby docs and all that bit that were absolutely insane. And so they were invited to come to Ohio and live there and work there. And yet I'm saying, well, from the Republican side, well, that's because there's so many Haitian immigrants there. They're taking up all the government resources. No, actually, they were actually working, 10, 12-hour days trying to make ends meet like everybody else is. And they're contributing to their community, and they were invited there. And nowhere in Haitian culture is there a thing about eating people's pets.
No, it blows my mind because like
It blows my mind we even have to say that.
I know it does, but like at the Epicurean Hotel where I was the senior HR manager, a third of my housekeeping and kitchen staff were Haitian, and they were some of the hardest working people. And guess what? They were all there legally. They all went through the process. Some of them were there on temporary status, trying to get their permanent status, but they had to go through the process. But it frustrates me that they keep being attacked. The immigration is the foundation of our nation. My great grandparents came here from Poland, France, and in Germany, and there are other people. We were in the 1920s doing selective people who we would allow into the nation because we were in that isolationist period after the First World War. And God forbid we go back to that type of mentality again, because the best ideas come from the groups that all lift us up, and it's from different viewpoints. And I want to be like Laura Loomer, go away.
And we deal with this in Tallahassee all the time. We're still dealing with guest speakers who come here to talk about the amount of psychosis that is caused by cannabis in this state, which is actually zero.
And the thing of this is that I've learned when it's come to dealing with Republicans and people who are of a like mind. A great example, Senator Rob Portman. He was a senator in Ohio. He was a really good guy. I actually voted for him back in the day, but he was so anti-LGBT until, oh my God, his son came out as gay. And then if it doesn't personally affect them, they don't care. And it was one of those things where when Rob Portman's son says, Dad, I'm gay, and then all of a sudden his whole stance changed on, gay marriage. And he's like, we need to change this. So that's kind of how it happens even in Florida politics. It's like NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yeah.
I guess is the best way to put it.
But then how do you explain people who like there's a bit of cognitive dissonance? Because I mean, I've heard Trump supporters say that he's championed the gay community because gay marriage became a thing when he was president. I've heard Trump supporters say that he's the cannabis guy before he even came out with this new Amendment 3 stance.
Is this the same Trump supporter that said where it was Obama 9/11?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? Actually, no, it's not. It seems like it's getting worse over time. It seems like even the Republicans that were able to approach things like 9/11 logically just can't do it anymore. They don't know what to do or what, people are just shoving misinformation down their fucking throat.
So I'd say
Carlos, you got Laura Loomer there from Florida, right in Trump's ear.
Florida woman.
And for her to make Marjorie Taylor Greene say, "Oh my God, that is racist." You got the bleach blonde, butch body built congresswoman from Georgia saying, "Oh my God, Florida woman is entirely too racist for my taste." That says a lot about the Republican Party and where they're at and who they have advising their candidate right now. That's a lot. That's a big stretch. I mean, look, all in all, we on this show strive to make sure that we have the best candidates to represent us in our community. And that's why we invite folks on the show. When folks ask us, well, how come you don't have a lot of Republicans on the show? Well, we invite Republicans. We've had them on the show. But as we just said, it's a dwindling pool of sanity, because I'm not going to allow folks who are batshit crazy to get on our platform and espouse things that are going to hurt other communities, that are going to hurt people that are just trying to live their lives here in America. And it's like, what is so difficult about the politics that we have? Like my personal politics, I'm happy to platform it for folks, is I would like for my gay neighbors to be able to protect their family with their machine guns and their weed. What is so hard about that? And let them people live their lives and get whatever medical treatment necessary. That is a simple platform, and for some reason, these folks think that's a far left idea in the world these days.
Well, no, I look at that saying that you just said as like a libertarian.
I agree.
Yeah, like
get the government out of my business.
Yeah, get the government out of my business type thing, and it's interesting too, because like, I mean, I recently like came to a realization, and I might be getting completely off topic and just like bitching about fucking Republicans and Democrats at this point. But I came to a new realization that back when I was claimed to be moderate and I was had ideas from both sides or whatever, that wasn't really moderate. That was pretty extreme right. Like that mentality where like, get the government out of my business, and a broken clock is right twice a day. Maybe they get a good policy on marijuana, or they get a good policy on whatever, but it's not the proper basis, and you end up with a marijuana system like Florida's, where big corporations are fucking running the business and keeping small people out of it. The real moderate both sides is democratic socialism. I mean, it is. It literally has both sides of the agenda in there. And it's just really interesting that the people on the far right are like, actually, I'm kind of in the middle, guys. I don't know. All right, go ahead, Gary. I'm sorry.
It just goes to show, as a nation, we have this cognitive dissonance. You think you're moderate, but people think on the Trump supporters are calling Kamala Harris a socialist, and it's like she's literally a center right candidate.
Yeah,
the Democratic Party is not a left wing party; it's literally a center right party that is advocating for normal policies that the rest of the world would consider moderate. And a lot of Bernie Sanders is a moderate in most parts of the world, Europe.
Yeah, in most of the world, they look at our Democrats as like fucking spoiled, fucking Americans. That like, we're too far to the right.
I mean, like if you look in the United Kingdom, their Conservative Party is our Democratic Party. Honestly, where they lie.
And I also like the fact that their elections only last a couple weeks, as opposed to 2 years, which does help out. By the way, that broken clock thing, I think that's the reason why Maggie Three Names actually got it right this time, because she gets the official broken clock award as far as that's concerned.
Team, we are over the 12 o'clock hour, and I know all of you gentlemen have busy campaigning lives at the moment. You have a limited amount of time to knock doors, make calls, do other talk shows. So I want to first go to Keith. Keith, if you could just tell the folks at home how they could get involved in your campaign, what they can do to support you, and just close us out on how you're feeling in this election.
Basically, just go to my website and votematthewsrn.com, and you can sign up. I have links to all my social media accounts. I do know that, for myself, when I see people, when I've seen them in every state of life, everybody has the same needs, the same wants, the same desires. We have a lot more in common than we do that separates us. And I just say, everybody needs to get the correct information, get a common information. And as far as what anybody else wants to do with their life, just mind your own damn business. As long as you're not hurting anybody, just keep moving forward. But again, votematthewsrn.com. I say a better choice for St. Johns County.
One point I want to make very quickly, and that is, again, I am actually NPA, which is non-party affiliate, but I call myself a Democrat, so I have somebody to vote for when it comes time for primaries, because we have closed primaries and things of that sort. And now I forgot what I was going to say again.
I was just about to call you out. You're far right nationalist.
No, not really, not really. But
Actually, it's amazing the evolution of the parties. I mean, Richard Nixon was a lot more left than anybody that in politics today. If you really look at his policies,
He started the EPA.
Yeah.
You would never think that'd come out of a Republican policy today when they're dismantling the EPA and any reference to environmental protection in Florida.
Climate change that we're not allowed to talk about in the state of Florida.
It
well,
actually
also,
had
Nikki
reason.
hasn't come on our show yet after the primaries. I know she's going to come on soon, hopefully. But that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about with her is that are they supporting their own candidates? I know that when I ran against Randy Maggard once upon a time, I got zero support from the Democratic Party in Pasco County. I think it partly had to do with the fact that I was pro cannabis, even though Greg Smithwick and those kind of folks are very pro cannabis. But I wasn't going to get any support from them at that point in time, so I didn't see it as a possibility. Now, Keith, in your area there, are you getting support from the DEC in your area?
Enough at this point. I mean, they're not putting a lot of resources into my campaign simply because I'm such a red district. It's such a gerrymandered red district that I'm running in. But I have a lot of support from the Environmental Caucus. I have a support of Planned Parenthood. I do have support from other areas that have been helping me a lot. But let's face it, the DEC doesn't have a whole lot of resource. I would like to see more respect to van access and things like that for the candidates. But I'm not going to sit here and complain, But I agree that I am not getting nearly as much. If Nikki were on this call, I would definitely like to have a conversation with her.
But your opponent is getting a lot of funds from the RPOF.
At least that I know of, $150,000-$200,000. Just from as well as PAC access. She's had a lot of with dark money for mail outs for her primary and all that stuff, which had resources of, according to what I read, which is actually put out by a Republican operative. According to what I read, she had somewhere in the neighborhood of over $1 million and put into her campaign. I don't know that for a fact. That's just actually it's in Politico and from a Republican operative, and that was for her. Like I say, for her when she took on the DeSantis lawyer, Nick Primrose, in her primary.
Well, we should tell you guys that these guys did not pay us a penny, which is good for them, not so great for us, to be on today. So this is a freebie as far as that's concerned, because the Republicans are putting money into their candidates, even in red districts. And yet I don't see that kind of support coming from the Democratic Party. I think Chris has the same kind of issue with the Democratic Party that I do in regards to that is concerned. And as far as Pasco is concerned, I love Johnny Ford and his wife. I once brought my daughter to a Democratic Party club meeting, and she said, "Dad, why are you the youngest person here? You're old." And the fact that they were holding it in a nursing home didn't mean anything. But the fact was, they need some fresh blood there. They need some fresh, energetic folks to go knocking on doors who don't get tired out after the first hour or two.
So it's very
I get
funny
more
that
support. I get more support from the
bring
local Democratic clubs than I do from the local Democratic Party. From the local Democratic clubs have been incredibly supportive, but they're the independent clubs, not the direct party affiliates themselves.
Gary, there's a lot to be said about the Democratic Party in Florida and even locally in the various counties. When Nikki took it over, the party was negative in its bank account. I mean, they weren't even able to make their staff health insurance payments, let alone the payroll. And then you have a dwindling amount of resources coming in from out of state because the Republican Party of Florida has done a great job of gerrymandering and electing, a supermajority and winning races statewide to where you're not seeing big unions put money into Florida. I mean, especially after DeSantis basically decimated unions with his payroll deduction bill. you see the fact that a lot of folks have just pretty much given up on Florida. But the fact is that Keith hasn't given up on Florida. Carl hasn't given up on Florida, and we, the people, are not going to give up on our home state of Florida. And so, Carl, I want to encourage folks. Carlos, if you could just flash Carl's thing, flash Keith one more time, real quick, and then we'll go to Carl. I want folks to go right now to votematthewsrn.com, drop a $5, $10 donation to Keith, and back his campaign, because as we said, he has a batshit crazy opponent who is a MAGA cultist running to represent his district. And Keith is a qualified registered nurse with credentials that is going to do right by our supporters and by the people. And Keith, we thank you for coming on the show. And hopefully we can invite you back on for a victory celebration after the election's over. So now we're going to go back into the studio with Karl. Karl, why don't you close us out? Tell the folks again a little bit about how you feel about this election and how they can support you.
Well, I was laughing because John Ford was brought up. So John Ford went into retirement, but he actually came out of retirement to come work my campaign. So it's very funny is that I was actually at a house party that friends of his had done Friday night, and there were 50 people squeezed into a house up in Murata. So the enthusiasm there is high, and it yielded almost $1,000 in donations that night alone. So I actually feel really good about this campaign because we're running a more modern campaign incorporating a highly geofenced digital. So because Wesley Chapel, as Gary will tell you, is highly fenced off with the gated communities. So it's a great way to get in there. So what we're doing right now is whenever Randy's out in public speaking is that they'll open up their phone and it's going to have, are you sick and tired of your cost of your insurance? This guy is the reason why, with this picture on it. And if you want it lowered, it'll say at the bottom, click on this guy. So we're really proud of what we're doing with that digital. I'm actually getting support, surprisingly, from the DEC and also from the Hillsborough DEC a little bit. So there is support there. I can reach out to Nikki. She does actually answer my emails, which has been amazing. I had the opportunity to meet her. So I feel really enthusiastic that we have a really good shot of winning this race because Randy is running an old school East Pasco, knock on the doors. I'm not going to go anywhere near Wesley Chapel type of operation because he'll get booed out as soon as he puts his face in anywhere near Wesley Chapel. But the bulk of the district, there's 80,000 people that live in Wesley Chapel now. It's blown up so much. So truly, I think we have a good shot. The best way that you can help, though, is if you go to our website, cieslakforchange.com. There are volunteer opportunities that you can do anywhere in the state from home. So we're doing a virtual phone bank. With that one that we use is the same one that I was called out, Vice President Harris. Too soon to say President Harris, but Vice President Harris is using. It's a really cool tool where you just click on, you do it from your phone, and it does dialing for you, and it uses our campaign phone. If it hits an answering machine or a voicemail, it just drops it in there and says, hey, I'm Karl, I'm ready to be your next representative, and it processes through. The great thing is, like yesterday, there were 4 people who did it for a couple hours. They hit 500 phones, and because it just flies through that system, so that's great. The other best and most important way is to make that donation. My average donation is $44. We have raised about $20,000 so far in the last 2 months, which has been fantastic. And that's where that enthusiasm is. And most of my donations do come from in district. So that shows you the big difference between the level of love from people who actually have gotten a chance to know me versus the corporate fielding that is done. And the best part is in the month of July and August, I had outraced Randy. So that was great because he's not taking my campaign seriously. So I'm kind of trying to stay under the radar, but we're trying to make a huge push right before vote by mail drops. So that way, when they're getting their ballots, they're going to have all this information with them. Because one of the things that Keith and I run into as a challenge is we're down ballot candidates. Most people will vote for the president, vice president. They'll vote for the Senate here in Florida, and then they'll vote for the constitutional amendments, and then they stop because they don't know what else to do when it comes to their local representation. But it's the people who work in your legislature that have the most impact in your day-to-day life, from the cost of your insurance, for your medical, cost of access to your marijuana, all these different things that really matter on your personal freedoms. Those are things that the state legislature does. And that's why we need to take back Florida together.
Fantastic. Now, quick question. Has Smart and Safe Florida ever offered you any funds? They put $50 million into Amendment 3 campaign. Have they given you, as a candidate who supports Amendment 3, who will be supporting Amendment 3 to your voters, have they helped you out at all?
No.
Smart and Safe Florida, that's an idea, if you're listening. Because
You know,
Bring
hey,
it down to people level.
to spend. I mean, spend it in the right places. Spend it on the grassroots organizations, and spend it on the grassroots candidates that are actually going to put this over the top. You know, Amendment 3 is going to be interesting because people want legal weed. People want to stop arresting people for weed. For all the naysayers that are on the cannabis advocacy side on Amendment 3, there are totally, voters who do not know these intricate fights between the hemp industry and medical marijuana industry. They just want to be able to smoke weed and not get arrested. And that's going to drive those voters to get off the couch and go vote. Some of them may not even be party affiliated, and they're going to have to make a decision. And so for those of you who watch the rotation that are maybe not typical voters or not super voters, this is your opportunity through these Better Know a Candidate segments to get to know people like Keith Matthews, to get to know people like Karl Cieslak, and get out there and cast your vote for the right folks to represent our communities in office. And so as we close out the show, Carlos, I think it's time to go to the news.
I was not ready.
That's the button to the right.
So as we jump at the top of the news, number one news headline: Trump reiterates his support for Florida's Amendment 3, says he will work with Congress to advance federal reforms. AOC calls bullshit. But Republican presidential candidate Trump has declared that he will be voting yes on Florida's ballot initiative legalizing adult use of marijuana sales, and says that if elected, he will work with Congress to enact reforms at a federal level, including the Safer Banking Act. In his latest social media post, Trump stated, "I believe it's time to end needless arrests and incarcerations of adults for small amounts of marijuana for personal use. We must also implement smart regulations while providing access for adults to a safe, tested product. As a Floridian, I will be voting yes on Amendment 3 this November. As president, we will continue to focus on research to unlock medical uses of marijuana to a Schedule 3 drug, work with Congress to pass common sense laws, including safe banking for state authorized companies, and supporting states' rights to pass marijuana laws like in Florida that work so well for their citizens." It's the second time in recent days that former President Trump has posted comments online in support of marijuana policy. In a prior post, he stated, "We do not need to ruin the lives and waste taxpayer dollars arresting adults with personal amounts on them." In that same post, he predicted passage of Florida's Amendment 3 initiative, which permits existing medical cannabis facilities to engage in adult use marijuana sales, but did not explicitly state whether he intended to vote for it. Now he's come right out. His statements come weeks after he added former presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr. and former Hawaii Democratic Representative Tulsi Gabbard to his transition team. Both have long been outspoken advocates for legalizing marijuana, and previously Trump had expressed criticism of states' decisions to legalize the adult use of marijuana, opinion that in some instances legalization has led to big problems. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has repeatedly said nobody should go to jail for possessing marijuana. And as U.S. Senator, Kamala Harris sponsored to end the federal prohibition of cannabis through the MORE Act. In March, Harris led a roundtable discussion with marijuana pardon recipients, including members of NORML, and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, actually signed adult use legislation into law in 2023, stating, "We've known for far too long that prohibiting the use of cannabis hasn't worked. By legalizing the adult use of cannabis, we're expanding our community and creating jobs and regulating the industry to keep Minnesotans safe." NORML actually had this statement to say, "In an election where every vote counts, both Trump and Harris wisely see advocating for marijuana policy reform as an opportunity to connect with a wide range of potential voters. And recent polling from swing states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin find voters overwhelmingly back legalizing marijuana. At a time where voters are historically divided, ending America's failed marijuana policy is the one issue that Americans actually largely agree on." So here we are, with everything polling above the 60% threshold for Amendment 3, but it's still, polls don't matter. It requires you, the voters, to get out and vote, because it is the amount of voters who cast their ballots that determine what makes it, not what the polls say. Moving on in the news. Yes.
How can Donald Trump vote for Amendment 3 if he's a convicted felon?
I can answer that.
Ron DeSantis has clearly stated that he was not going to pull Donald Trump's voting rights, and if I recall, his convictions are still pending sentencing. So he's kind of in that gray area right now. DeSantis said he has no intention to take Trump's voting rights away. So we will see how that all shakes out come this November.
I can actually answer that on the HR side. So legally speaking, because he was convicted in the state of New York, it's wherever the laws of the state where you're convicted. So that's the way it's written in Florida. So because he wasn't convicted in Florida, he didn't lose his rights right away. So because in New York State, it's only if you're actually incarcerated do you lose your right to vote. So they follow that's how the law follows. So
it also tracks why he would have re-registered in Florida instead of registering in New York where he previously was registered.
Correct.
Let's be clear. That's not a gray area. That's an orange area, and he's the only one who stands in it.
Well, moving on to major news here, and Carlos, you're going to definitely want to hear this. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that all hemp-derived products, including those that undergo chemical synthesis during manufacturing, are legal under federal law, contradicting the DEA's opinion on the legality of certain hemp-derived products. This decision is consistent with the 2022 Ninth Circuit ruling, but contradicts guidance provided more recently by the DEA. In a February 13th, 2023 letter, the DEA argued that the 2018 Farm Bill never intended to legalize products that do not occur in the cannabis plant and can only be obtained synthetically, such as THCO, regardless of THC content. In its ruling, the judges acknowledged that the DEA and the Ninth Circuit Court disagreed on the matter, and the Ninth Circuit held that it didn't need to consider the DEA's position on synthetically derived substances because the definition of hemp under the 2018 Farm Bill was unambiguous in its application to all products derived from the cannabis plant, so long as they do not cross the 0.3% Delta 9 THC threshold, the court determined. Between the DEA's February 2023 letter and the Ninth Circuit decision, we think the Ninth Circuit's interpretation of the 2018 Farm Act is the better of the two, and we're free to make that determination ourselves, despite contrary interpretations from the DEA, because we agree with what the Ninth Circuit said is unambiguous. The case before the court centered on whether an employer could fire a worker for using hemp products. Ultimately, judges upheld the defendant's termination because they failed to provide sufficient evidence that the products consumed possess THC at limits below the 0.3% established by the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. Normal and other groups continue to urge the FDA to establish regulatory guidelines governing the production, testing, labeling, and marketing of certain intoxicating hemp-derived products. And in 2021, Normal actually issued a report on Delta THC and other novel synthetically derived cannabinoids that actually caution consumers to avoid unregulated products that are untested and may contain impurities. As Carlos has said time and time again, ask for the certificate of authenticity. Make sure that it's up to date, and do your research as you're consuming these products. And again, we don't have worker protection in Florida, so if you consume a hemp product and you test hot on a workplace drug test, it's going to be difficult to prove it. So we need to continue to elect people in office like the ones that we continue to invite on our shows to pass this legislation to change that. Now, moving on to other news. Interesting ruling out of Tennessee. The judges on the Tennessee Supreme Court have determined that an alert from a drug-sniffing dog does justify a broader search of defendant's automobile, despite acknowledging that the dogs cannot distinguish between hemp products and marijuana. This is interesting because in Florida, the FDLE has been running into the same thing, and they're essentially, trying to avoid these searches. But as you have overzealous cops that will violate civil rights and such. This is interesting because other states have, essentially gotten rid of drug sniffing dogs for marijuana. It depends on what state you're in and how things shake out. But in its ruling, the Tennessee Supreme Court affirmed that an alert from a drug dog, absent other evidence of suspicious activity, is not probable cause for a search. Rather, judges determine that probable cause is based on a totality of circumstances, and a positive indication from a drug-sniffing dog is part of those total circumstances. A summary of the case posted on the Tennessee court's website stated, even though Tennessee's decision to legalize hemp made the dog alert less certain, probable cause does not demand absolute certainty. An alert from a drug-sniffing dog still shows a likelihood that illegal drugs are present. Tennessee actually legalized the possession of hemp products in 2019, although marijuana remains illegal in the state. Judges in the case concluded, we hold a positive indication from a drug sniffing canine may continue to contribute to a finding of probable cause when examining the totality of circumstances, notwithstanding the legalization of hemp. And I bring this up because in the state of Maryland and the state of Virginia, they have actually removed the smell of marijuana as probable cause for a search through legislative remedy. And that is something that we're going to have to address in Florida post Amendment 3. And as part of the, essentially the enabling legislation for the amendment. So for those of you out there, who want to get involved in how Amendment 3 gets implemented, this is definitely one of those policies that we're going to have to address legislatively in ending, the probable cause for searches, because people shouldn't have their tar costs. Another interesting thing is that despite having legal weed in many states, there's still a disproportionate of Black and Latino motorists that have their cars flipped for cannabis searches, even though it's legal in legal states. So that there's still a disparity in the criminal justice system of how ethnic and racial minorities are being treated. Now, moving past some of these legal issues in the news, one interesting thing is that in North Carolina, despite not having legal weed, the Cherokee tribe of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians have begun selling cannabis products to patrons 21 years and older, regardless of whether they're members of the federally recognized tribe. Tribal members initially began selling marijuana products to authorized patients in April, and in July, they began engaging in adult use sales exclusively to other tribal members. On Saturday last week, they expanded sales to anyone over the age of 21, and an estimated 4,000 customers were lined up on hand to purchase cannabis products from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina. According to data published in May in the Journal of Marijuana Business Daily, federally recognized tribes are currently operating cannabis businesses in 9 states: California, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, South Dakota, and Washington State. Neither the recreational use nor the medical use of cannabis is permitted in North Carolina. And Senate lawmakers earlier this year advanced legislation to regulate medical cannabis access, but House leaders in North Carolina failed to take up the measure. Statewide polling shows that 78% of North Carolina voters support legalizing cannabis for medical marijuana patients. In response to the Cherokee's actions, Congressman Chuck Edwards, who's a Republican for North Carolina, introduced federal legislation, House Resolution 5323, seeking to withdraw federal funding from jurisdictions that permit marijuana sales. The bill is not anticipated to even get a hearing in the House, which just goes to show you that even a Republican leadership in the House don't want to crack down on cannabis sales. Obviously, there is definitely a lot to be said in advancing policy and such between the two political parties. Now, going over to the medical side of things, a recent survey of patients in the journal Open Neurology showed that patients with rheumatic conditions frequently substitute cannabis for their prescription medications. These are patients with neuropathy, fibromyalgia, osteoarthritis, and other rheumatic conditions. And researchers affiliated with McGill University in Montreal and the University of Michigan surveyed 763 U.S. and Canadian patients with rheumatic conditions. This is consistent with other studies that showed 63% of respondents reported substituting cannabis products for other medications, including non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs. That's 55% of folks pretty much toss the ibuprofen for cannabis. 49% were tossing their opioids, and 30% or stopped using other sleep aids. 25% substituting their muscle relaxants. Following the substitution, most patients reported decreases or cessation of their medications that they were using. Respondents typically reported turning to cannabis because it offered better symptom management and was associated with fewer adverse effects. Those who substituted cannabis in place of other medications reported greater improvements in pain, sleep, joint stiffness, muscle spasm, inflammation, and global health. The acceptance of medical cannabis as a treatment strategy for rheumatic conditions is evolving. The study's authors concluded these encouraging results of medication reduction and favorable effects of medical cannabis require confirmation with more rigorous methods, and comparative effective clinical trials of medical cannabis versus other pain treatments are needed, as are more prospective studies investigating the effects of medical cannabis on the use of medications and other substances in rheumatic populations. So what does this say? The safety and efficacy of cannabis remains what it is. Obviously, there's more research to be done. Consult your doctor before you stop using certain medications. But if medical cannabis works for you, it works for you, and you should have that right to do that. And we at Normal will continue to fight for your right to do that.
I wonder how many people replace ADHD medicine with that, or like neurodivergent medicines and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's just
that's a good point, Karl.
I didn't hear anything about neurodivergent medicine in there.
Well, this study was specifically on rheumatic conditions, but you're right. There are people with Tourette syndrome. There are people with ADHD. There are people with autism who in certain states do have access to medical cannabis and do see a reduction in symptoms. I personally have a friend who from Florida who moved to Vermont, and he utilizes medical cannabis to help with his tics for his Tourette syndrome, and it calms down the tics. And so, definitely having access to medical cannabis makes a big deal in people's daily lives who have those type of neurological conditions. So now, one announcement I think I want folks to know is that on December 2nd, the DEA is having a hearing for marijuana rescheduling. And so this will be a hearing on marijuana's reclassification to Schedule 3. And this is really the opportunity for marijuana advocates to make their case for rescheduling. You can go to the DEA's website and sign up. And sign up to be a witness. It bears repeating that the DEA has held administrative law proceedings on this in the past. In fact, between 86 and 88, DEA administrative judge, a law judge, Francis Young, heard days of testimony for both reclassifying and against reclassifying cannabis. In 88, Young heard from Normal, and he actually ended up concluding that marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. By any measure of rational analysis, marijuana can be safely used within a supervised routine of medical care. It would be unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious for the DEA to continue to stand between those sufferers and the benefits of substance in light of evidence of this record. But, hey, the Bush administration and the Reagan administrations, DEAs chose to continue this capricious nature. And to be fair, so did the Clinton, the W as well, and Obama, Trump, and, President Biden is really calling this into question. So thank you, President Biden, for making sure that this actually happens. The sad part is it will not happen before the election, so it will not necessarily have any bearing on the election. But I can tell you this: if you look at the candidates and where they have been and all of this and who they have appointed to various positions, it is clear to me that Kamala Harris is much better on cannabis than Donald Trump has been, because when she was in the Senate, she actually was the sponsor of the bill to remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act and actually legalize it to address issues of expungement and to put money into those communities that have been harmed by the war on cannabis. Lastly, as we close out the news for you lawyers out there, December 5th through December 7th in Key West, Florida, Normal is hosting their Key West Legal Seminar. This is a fully accredited legal seminar by all states that require continuing legal education credits, and you can get CLEs as a practicing attorney for attending. Visit normal.org and check it out. They're going to have some amazing accommodations because it's going to be held at the Pier House Resort and Spa in Key West. And it's located right there on Duval Street on the Gulf of Mexico, just steps away from Sloppy Joe's, Mallory Square, the Key West Aquarium, and an array of restaurant, art galleries, and boutiques and resorts. So I think folks definitely want to get in on that discounted room block, and can definitely go onto the Normal website and reserve the room. There's going to be some awesome seminars going on, and folks have the opportunity to connect with members of the Normal Legal Committee and get the latest on when it comes to being a practicing attorney in this ever-evolving environment of cannabis law. And with that, That's the normal news.
Now, Key West, I love Key West. The only problem is they really need to shorten the causeway because I can be driving like 5 hours and I'm still only at Marathon. So that always kind of like says maybe I should just turn back. Maybe it's just not there anymore. But you have to keep on driving and driving and driving, or you can actually get there faster by boat, I think. But the fact is, Key West is a great place to visit, and I hope you guys go forward. I did want to make a touch on a couple of things in regards to your news is concerned. Now, Jack Campbell was one of the state attorneys in Jackson in Tallahassee. Even stated that they had no field test to have differentiate between cannabis and CBD. And beyond you, cannabis sniffing dogs, they're very sensitive but not very specific as we go by as far as lab tests are concerned. So they really cannot tell. So my recommendation to you, because if you have a doob tube lying in your car from some previous party a year ago, they could probably still smell that in your car. So I would recommend that if you do have that kind of situation or you don't remember where that doob tube went, it's probably under the seat. But I would guarantee you that if you bring a CBD pre-roll tube and put it in your car, and if the dog comes by and sits down, say, yes, that's this old tube, you may have a better chance of dealing with things. You didn't hear that from me, okay? But I'm just saying that is a possibility of way of handling that particular situation because we're still in Florida, and police still have discretion as to how they want to handle you if and when they pull you over for whatever reason. So
Well,
just be careful of that. Otherwise, I'd say retire the dogs. Let them sniff bullshit. That way they'll stay in Tallahassee all the time sitting down.
Well, Gary, there's another thing to think about. We talked a little bit about Amendment 3, and folks have concerns about that. I would recommend you get you a medical marijuana container, and then, you essentially put whatever you want in it after the fact. I am not a lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just saying is that if I was in that situation and I was worried about, how things shake out with Amendment 3, having a medical marijuana container on hand to transport your cannabis might be more beneficial to the bureaucrats that you're encountering in a traffic stop. Rather than trying to litigate it after the fact in court, so which could cost
There
you
was
$7,000.
ever such a thing as marijuana fraud. I think that would be it. Putting your weed in a hemp container.
Hey, whatever it takes to not get arrested in the grand scheme of things, because this is an unjust policy. Was it Bill Murray or somebody else that said the most dangerous thing about weed is getting caught with it?
Yeah.
So, well, with that team, hey, we appreciate Keith and Karl for being such troopers and sticking it out to the end of the show with us. And then, of course, catch us next week in the rotation, 11 a.m. each and every Sunday, all the way through the election. We're going to have some amazing guests and candidates, and we're going to continue each and every week to bring you the latest in cannabis news and entertainment. And we will catch you